Hi, I'm Nikki Turpin, the Programming Director here at the Robbins House.
In 1823, a daughter was born here to Susan and Jack Garrison. Her parents named her Ellen. She would grow up to become a remarkable teacher and a courageous civil rights activist. Among her bold accomplishments, she would be among the first group of people to test the nation's first Civil Rights Act. This is her story. Ellen's experience growing up in Concord was both inspiring and challenging. As a child, she and her siblings attended Concord's public schools. Local historian Edward Jarvis recalled that the Garrison children were bright and intelligent and well-trained at home. They were all good scholars.
While slavery no longer existed in Massachusetts when Ellen was a child, racial discrimination was not uncommon, and Ellen learned this when she was 12 and wanted to participate in the bicentennial parade in Concord, Massachusetts. She was crowded out and treated ill, as she had quoted, and it wasn't until her white schoolmate, Abba Prescott, offered to hold Ellen's hand did her mother say yes, she could attend the bicentennial parade. The two girls marched side by side, and there are multiple articles stating how joyous it was to see them together.
Ellen grew up in a time when the rights of African Americans became a topic of local and national importance. Ellen's family engaged deeply with the question of civil rights. Her mother, Susan, was a founding member of the Ladies' Anti-Slavery Society of Concord. In 1838, Ellen's name, along with those of her mother and sister, appeared on a petition protesting the government's treatment of the Cherokee. Ellen was 15 years old. In the early 1840s, Ellen left Concord and moved to Boston. She carried a letter of recommendation from Concord's anti-slavery activist, Mary Merrick Brooks. Once in Boston, she joined the African Baptist Church and continued her recently deceased mother's legacy of anti-slavery activism and also began her career as a teacher. During this time, she signed at least 4 petitions calling for equal rights for African Americans. She also helped organize 2 events to honor prominent abolitionist leaders. By 1863, Ellen, now married to John Jackson, had moved to Newport, Rhode Island, where she was in charge of a small private school. In the midst of the Civil War, Ellen applied to the American Missionary Association. The American Missionary Association worked under the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands, usually referred to as simply the Freedmen's Bureau. It was a U.S. government agency from 1865 to 1872. After the Civil War, to direct provisions, clothing, and fuel for the immediate and temporary shelter and supply of destitute and suffering refugees and freedmen, their wives, and children. Ellen explained her motivation to teach in a letter written in June 1863. I have a great desire to go and labor among the freedmen of the South. I think it is our duty as people to spend our lives in trying to elevate our own race. Who can feel for us if we do not feel for ourselves? And who can feel the sympathy that we can who are identified with them? Ellen's application was accepted, and between 1865 and 1870, she taught hundreds of freed people of all ages in Maryland and Virginia. Ellen experienced firsthand the hostility directed at recently emancipated African Americans during their time in the Reconstruction South. Letters she wrote reveal multiple incidents of harassment and racial discrimination. While working in Maryland, Ellen wrote, "It is unsafe to go out. This is for colored people, for they are stoned and driven out at the pleasure of the rowdies. This seems somewhat strange to me, yet so it is." Despite the risks, she continued her work.
In 1866, Mary Anderson, a fellow co-worker with Ellen, decided that they were going to stand their ground. They were thrown out of a train station's waiting room in Baltimore. They decided to sue the railroad company for discrimination, and theirs is probably still the earliest case to apply this new law. There's so many Civil Rights Act laws on the books, but to know that the person who lived in this house fought the first is actually amazingly exciting.
In the 1870s, Ellen moved to North Carolina. She spent several years there teaching in a number of different freedmen's schools. By 1877, the federal government fully retreated from Reconstruction. In its place, over the next several decades, many states had enacted Jim Crow laws aimed at restricting the rights of blacks. In the face of this reality, many African Americans left the South and moved to the West with the hope of building new lives. Remaining true to her calling, Ellen followed those migrants to Barton County, Kansas, and she settled there in a community of formerly enslaved people known as the Exodusters. In 1881, Ellen, now a widow, married Harvey Clark. Harvey was a widower with 5 children. Throughout the 1880s, Ellen continued to teach the children of the formerly enslaved. Eventually, Ellen moved to Pasadena, California. She lived there for the last 2 years of her life. She died of tuberculosis at the age of 69.
She just took this passion with her to say that all people of color needed to have the advantage of reading and writing, and she was adamant about making sure it was part of her life's purpose. As a fellow educator, I feel that every day as I sit in classrooms right now during this pandemic, hoping and making sure that students have accessibility to everything they need, whether they're remote learners or in person. You can find out more information about Ellen Garrison and other residents of the Robbins House on our website, robbinshouse.org. When you access the website, feel free to check out all the brochures and other videos in this series to learn more about the residents of Concord, Massachusetts.